everybody. I hope you are doing well and enjoying the beautiful weather we've been having lately. I know it's been a lot of gloomy weather and rain recently, so having the sunshine out is just giving me so much energy and making me feel better. So hopefully you're out and about enjoying time with friends and family, getting some fresh air, and just enjoying your time out of lockdown, which I know we've all been dying for. So today I am really excited to show you how to create this really fun Highland cow painting. So this one incorporates some beginner and advanced techniques, but I've simplified it as much as possible so you can create a really beautiful animal. And you can also experiment with different textures and colors while you're painting. So we're going to slow things down for this one just because the design is a little bit more complex than some of my previous ones. And I'm also going to work a little bit larger than I normally do for demonstrations, just so there's more room for error. So if you're wanting to, you can work larger. I would say maybe something like a 9 by 12 or a 10 by 12 would be great. And that way you have, the areas of the facial features just are a little bit easier to work with the brushes that you might have. So I'm also going to be using some masking fluid today, or Frisk. And this is great because it blocks out the white of the paper before you start painting. So it works like a liquid latex, and it's something that I like to use just to preserve the white inside the design to create a connection between your design and the material that you're using, which I think is always really important for watercolor. So if you don't have this on hand, maybe you have like a white wax crayon, that works great. And all that's going to do is repel the watercolor from your paper and create a similar looking design. So the size of your lines are going to be a little bit bigger, but it does give you the opportunity to experiment with it and create that same look from your piece. So if you don't have white, maybe you have beige or something close to the color of your paper. I just wouldn't suggest using like green or red or something because that is going to show in your design. So I also have a series of round brushes that I'm going to be using today. So I have the number 2, 4, and 6, which are my go-tos here. So if you don't have these exact sizes, just use what you have. And then if you are working a little bit larger, sometimes you need to scale up with your brushes as well. So something like a number 10 is going to help you when you're bringing in some of this general design and colors, since we're working in this loose style. So this one to me is like a combination of loose brush strokes mixed with some technical work, just so you can preserve the features of the animal and make it have some character, I guess. So this one is based on one that I saw at Linford Hall a couple months ago. It was like the loner of the pack, and I just fell in love with it. I thought it was such an adorable animal, and they're just so beautiful. So I used some of my reference photos that I took that day and created my own version of this Highland cow. But while you're working today, maybe you like more of like those rusty red or dark brown looking Highland cows for your color palette. Or maybe you want to go to the other end of the spectrum where they have that sandy white color. It doesn't matter. All of the colors that we'll use today will work for you. So feel free to experiment with that. So the palette that I'm going to show you is one from my website, just so if you have that one, you can track what colors we're mixing. And then I also have the tube version from the same brand, just to make it easier to show you the mixing process on camera. And it just goes a little bit faster for me for these demonstrations. And if you don't have these exact colors, just reach out to me. I can maybe give you like a little swatch of it so you can complete your project. So the last thing you'll want is a paper towel and a cup of water, or 2 cups of water if you want to do that process where you have one that's for your dirty cup of water and one for your clean. Or you can just, trade this out every now and then for some fresh water, and a pencil. So, and watercolor paper, of course. But that's all I'm going to use today. And I'm going to set up my space and I will be right back. Okay, so before we start sketching in our design, I just want to quickly show you what colors we're going to be using from the palette, and hopefully you have everything on hand. If not, you can always replace things as you go. or, mix colors as you need to, because it's not really that expansive of a color palette. So for this one, we're mostly focusing on the colors within like the hair and other furs of the Highland cow. So we're going to see a lot of like this rusty red color, like a burnt sienna or a sepia, some of this burnt umber, a little bit of yellow ochre. So some of this we're going to mix from other colors, and then some you can always just pull straight from the pan here. So we'll just do a quick swatch of everything we're using. So I'm just going to dip my brush in my water. And if you're using tubes, you won't need to add that much water to it to create your design. So one thing I like to have with this is more of a saturated color in areas. So this is where you can see these bold yellows every now and then that are incorporated into it. So sometimes yellow ochre looks a little bit dull. So I like to use my cadmium yellow. Already has a little bit of an orange tint to it, or not tint, but color to it. So it's already closer to that range that we're looking for today. I'm also going to use some alizarin crimson. Okay. Some ultramarine blue. We're going to use those to mix together a violet color. And the reason for that is we're using lots of yellows in our piece today. So I want to have little pops of a violet color every now and then just to make those yellows pop. So you can see right along here, I have some of that incorporated into the horns. And we can also see a little bit more of like a red violet on this opposite side. And some of it's mixed in within here. I was just doing that a little bit more muted, because you always want a little bit less of the complementary color that you're using compared to that bold dominant color. So obviously yellow and orange are going to be our dominant colors. So if I mix these two together just to show you on screen, I'm just going to mix it on my paper. You can mix it in a palette so you have it ready for you. It creates this really beautiful violet. So if I were to take some of that with a little bit of my yellow, they're going to eventually cancel each other out. So this starts to create more of like a murky yellow color, almost like a mustard color, which is great if you want to include that in some of the hairs of the Highland cow. Or let's say you want more of a brown color. Send a little bit more of my red. This is where you can create more of that rusty color. So it's similar to a burnt umber, but it has just a little bit more vibrancy to it. And that's why I like to pull from my primary colors or a variation of them, like what you're seeing right here with our first three. And that just gives us a little bit more vibrancy. So just to show you in comparison, which you can always use, there's no problem with using something straight out of the pan. I prefer not to, just to practice color mixing. This burnt umber is similar to it, but sometimes it just comes out a little bit flat. So I'll let you decide which one you prefer to use in your design. So let me mix that a little bit better. There we go. That actually looks very similar, but normally it doesn't. So I must have mixed that pretty similar. Oh, you can see there a little bit better. Okay. Another color that you can use to create some of the drama and colors within the Highland cow is a color that I love to use. And this is a burnt sienna. You might have a raw sienna in your palette too, so whichever one you prefer. And this is a very thin consistency. I like to use this for what's known as glazing. So after my other colors dry, I can do a thin layer of this over other areas. You can see those pops of color within the design, especially along the top of the head and the ears. That's where I pull this color in, just because it is more transparent. And it's just one that's perfect for this design today because you see this color throughout the Highland cow. So this is one where I'm okay with pulling straight from the pan. And then lastly, what you can use is yellow ochre. If you want to pull straight from your pan today. And this one is also a little bit more muted, kind of like this burnt umber that we had. It's pre-mixed, so sometimes if you want more of that drama or vibrancy of the colors, that's where I go back to mixing my complementary colors. So you can get something similar to it, but it's always just like a little bit off. So you have plenty of opportunities to mix and match those colors while you're creating your wet and wet technique here. Okay. One other thing I want to show you that we're going to mix frequently is our ultramarine blue and this burnt umber color here. So this is where I can go back in with something straight out of the pan if I'm mixing it with another color. And it creates a really beautiful gray or washed out burnt umber. So if I take some of that burnt umber over here, a little bit of my ultramarine blue, you get a nice gray. It's like a nice blue gray color. And the reason why I want to use that today is because we are using another complementary color. And I know this is kind of confusing right now, but as we're painting, I'll go over this more. But with our piece, we're using a lot of these oranges and reds too. And orange and blue are complementary colors. So if I were to just drop this color straight into here, if I use it sparingly, it'll be okay. But since we're using a lot of muted and natural colors, I want to stick within that color palette. So that's where I mixed it with my burnt umber to get more of this Payne's gray color. So to make this a little bit more of a brown color or a sepia color, and take a little bit more of that burnt umber, or not sepia color. I'm mixing my colors up too much. I'm talking too much. I can mix that with a little bit less blue, and I can get a really nice wash. Trying to get the color that I'm looking for. There we go. So it's similar to your burnt umber here out of the pan, but adding that blue to it just neutralizes it a little bit more. And that's where I got some of these nice hints of blues and browns within the piece. So you can see right along here, it's a very soft blue. It's more of like a neutral blue, but it brings out the reds in the piece. So it's not overwhelming your colors. It's not competing with your colors that you want to really showcase with your design, but it's there. So I hope that makes sense. I'm always trying to find ways to include color theory in this, even though it's complicated. I just need to do a full color theory class, and I keep telling myself I'm going to do it, and then I get kind of overwhelmed by it because it would probably take forever. But it's coming, I promise. So that's the colors that we're going to use today. You can see here, if we add more of our water to it, we can obviously dilute this down. So like our cadmium yellow here, you can easily just add some water to it. If you're looking for more of that sandy colored Highland cow, you got some of your pale yellows right there. or even your yellow ochre out of the pan if you add some more water to it. You get some really beautiful sandy colors there too. So don't be afraid to spend some time just doing swatches, because that always helps me, for one, warm up, but it also gives me an idea of what colors I plan on using for my design, which I think is always really helpful. So you don't have to be as like OCD about it as I'm probably being on screen right now, but it's something that I would say to keep in the back of your mind while you're working, just to prepare yourself. So you're not looking at a palette like this and getting confused about what you want to use or overwhelmed, especially if you have a bigger palette. So I'm going to quickly take a break to rinse out my cup of water really quick. And then we will get started on our little sketch for our design and get ready to do the painting. Okay, so now we are ready to start sketching in the details of our Highland cow. And this is going to look a little bit different from what you're seeing on screen right now, because we're just looking for the overall shapes. So in this case, things that like dissolve or are more affected by like the brush strokes like you see down here, we're just gonna have a few little details of. And then obviously with the ears, we're only gonna just do a simple shape that we can fluff out with other brush strokes. So this is just going to be like the basic foundation of our painting. And I'm going to draw quite dark on screen, but you can always use a lighter hand. That way, when you're erasing, you won't have problems. You aren't digging into your paper or anything that might cause an issue when you're painting. So I like to determine, the shape of the horns and the size of them before I start working on anything else. And in this case, I really liked this asymmetrical look that I had from this piece, but you can always have them going upwards if you want to have more of that traditional horn shape like that. So you can always do that. The rest of the piece is basically going to be exactly the same with the proportions of the face and the ears. So have fun with it. If there's something you want to test out, you can always sketch it in and erase it wherever you need it to be. So I'm just going to stick closely to this design just because I like how it looks. So sometimes you also want to have a little bit more room around the borders of your piece. This one was just a sketch, but you can always plan ahead if you want to have like a 1-inch or 2-inch border around it. So then you can frame it easier or mat it. But in this case, I'm just going to go right in. So I'm going to start with this basic line right here that tapers down. So I'm just going to sketch this in lightly. Go a little bit darker because I know you can't see that on screen right now. Okay. And then I'm just going to round out those ends. And as they're pulling back towards the head of the Highland cow, they're just going to get a little bit wider. Like that. Now, if they're too long or something's off with it, that's fine. We can fix that in just a little bit. I just want to get this big shape in first so that we can see what the proportions are for the rest. Okay. Let's see, we have, yeah. I'm trying to find the best way to measure this. So the ears go right about to the base of the head right here. If I were to measure from here to here and over. So to do that, I'm going to just keep this easier for myself. I'm going to just start with this egg shape right here that's formed from the face and top of the head. And then I'm also going to create kind of a pointed triangle or an elongated triangle for the ears. So we'll go ahead and put that in. I was starting to get too fancy with proportions and I was like, there's no point. We'll be here all day if I do that. So we're going to get it close to the original design. So we're getting kind of this egg shape out of it to start with. Again, we're just mapping in the shapes right now. We're going to specify everything in just a little bit. There's a little bit of the top of the head here where it comes more to a point. And then that's going to help us determine where the ears are going to go. So you can just pull these lines down to like a triangle shape. So right about here on both sides. And then you can just round those out. Part of it goes like that. So I'm going to make this a little bit smaller because I want to have room for tufts of hair that go out. And I can already tell I need to make a few little changes to the horns. So I'm just going to extend this one out a little bit more. And then this one I'm going to make a little bit shorter. So I'm going to cut it off right about here. Maybe a little bit longer. And this is me following the original design closely, but you do not need to make this exactly the same. Let's see. That's pretty close. I don't want to be too picky. This is just having fun. Okay. Now, if I were doing this for a commission or something, I'd take a lot longer to map everything out. But sometimes it's good just to keep things really loose and then see what happens. Okay, so from there, what we're going to do is start focusing briefly on this inner shape of the features right here. You can see how it starts to slim down a little bit. So we have those tufts of hair that help create that egg shape that we saw, but now we need to figure out this longer shape within. So what I like to do is just create two little lines that start pulling down in the opposite direction here. So I already started doing a little bit, but I just want to have slightly smaller lines. Same as like when you see like the shape of a horse's head, whereas it's going further down the muzzle, it gets like a little bit more tapered. Okay. And then every now and then I'll just check proportions. My fingers keep moving. So I can see that the ears are wider than this length here for the head. And that's, I don't know if that's that proportional for all Highland cows, but just for this design to keep it similar, I know that this needs to be a little bit shorter than here. So if you want, you can just use your fingers to measure that out and make sure that this bottom line right here goes to about here. Okay, so it should have a little bit of a gap between the two. Just going to double check that again. Doing this on screen feels really weird. Yeah, that's about right. So we haven't put in the muzzle or the like nostrils or anything yet, but that's fine. We'll do that in just a minute. I just needed to know where this bottom length is because that's going to help us determine where this part of the mouth is going to be. And since we've tapered this down a little bit now, we can start to see where the shape of the muzzle is. So this is slightly off to the side. You can always center that up if you want. I'm just, again, keeping it similar to how I did the original design, because he did have like a slight tilt to his head. So I'm just going to keep that in mind on this one. And I'm going to start putting in this overall shape right here. So I'm going to keep that on the screen so you can see how it dips in a little bit. And I know that this is like the bottom part of the lip, so I can just start to create that shape. Oh no, the cat is crying. Oh wow. He's always crying if you've worked with me with the cat. He is a mess. But he's cute. Okay. So if you want, you can always just draw down a little mark here to show where the rest of the torso is. Most of this is going to just be done really in a gestural way, so we can leave that really simple. And most of the time I don't even draw these lines in, I'll just start painting. But just to make sure that you've got some room for error, we have that there. Just going to make these a little bit lighter. Okay. And then also you see where the hairs are starting to separate along here, where you can get the illusion of the top of the muzzle where it's connecting to the rest of the head. So the direction of the hairs on the Highland cow are really important. So sometimes they'll have like a swoop to them, sometimes they'll be really curly. But in this case, there's just a slight kind of separation or parting that is going down the center of this one. So I'm going to just do a little mark for that, a little curved V shape here. And then I'm also just going to do a curve that goes in this direction from like the bottom to the ear over to the other bottom of the ear. I'm just looking for some of these inner lines that are going to help me find the eyes. Okay. So the eyes are usually right about here on both sides. One second. Okay, and then so to do the eyes, we kind of have the placement now of them. If you want to just do a little oval for each section. And on this side up here, I'm just going to show you closer up how we're doing that shape, just because it's hard to see with them this small. So the shape of the eyes runs where you have this kind of line right here. So this is going to be the top of the eye that leads down to the eyelashes. Make that a little bit bigger. Okay. So start with a curve like that. And then you're going to create kind of like a pointed almond shape. That. And there usually is a little bit of a white to the eye, just in these two spots right here. I didn't put that in the original one so much, just because they're so small. And then usually there's like a little glint to the eye where it's reflecting. even if you just put one little mark right there. So what we're going to do when we add our masking fluid is we're going to mark out the entire eye, so we don't have to worry about getting those details so close. If you're working larger, obviously you can choose how much of this you want to block out. Move that closer so you can see. And the reason why I extended this out a little bit is because that's usually where the eyelashes are. Just to create that look. Oh, those are kind of long. Let me not be so dramatic with it. Like that. Okay. And then you would just mimic that on the other side. So matching the eyes is always like the hardest part. There's always one that wants to be like a little bit wonky, but we're going to make do with it. Obviously these are really small. So I'm going to go in now. We're going to start again with that curve shape. So on this side, it would just be, I'm going to start with that long curve, that. Okay. And then we're going to create, I think always like of like Egyptian eye makeup when I create this shape right here. So it's a little bit long. I'm going to make this taller. Okay. And then you can always create the white of the eye if you want to round that out a little bit. So that's how this one's going to look right here. It's not bad that time. First time I did this, it took me a minute. They were really wonky, but that's just me finding where they need to go. So if it takes you a few tries, that's completely normal. Making anything look kind of symmetrical is always tricky. Okay. So I know I'm going to completely block these out, so I'm not worried about adding in those other details yet. We'll do that as we do the eyes later. Just want more of a curve to that. There we go. And then obviously we need to finish the rest of the nostrils too. So sometimes it helps just to create a little X shape towards the center. And that's going to help you determine where the nostrils are. I just do a little curved shape out from there. Again, this doesn't need to be perfect. This is me just getting a good foundation again for my design. Oh gosh, this cat. I don't know if you can hear him, but he is screaming. So I'm going to push through this and then I'll take a quick break to check on him. And that's pretty much like the foundation that we want for our Highland cow. Now, sometimes it helps if you want to just create that connecting line right here. They tend to have slightly different color right here for the nose. And I'm just going to get rid of that X shape because I don't need that anymore. And then that is what I have for that part. Now these are really dark lines again, so we're going to erase most of these in just a minute. So I don't need most of these lines. We can get rid of this line right here. We're going to keep a faint line right here for this V shape. So we remember that this splits down here and goes in a different direction. So we have like the fringe from the top of the head, you can see down here, and then it parts its way out, and then you have the tufts of hair on the sides. So when erasing, just, take your time with it. I tend to keep the eyes a little bit darker when I am working on animals and stuff, just because you spend all that time making the eyes perfect, and you definitely don't want to go back in and try and recreate that after you did all that painting. So we're just going to push these lines back. We're not trying to erase all of it, just a little bit, so it looks more like a connect the dots. And I'm still going to keep this pretty dark for on screen, just in case you need to reference it again while you're painting. But it should look like a very faint version of this. So try and break up any heavy lines, because like I said earlier, with watercolor, or maybe in a different edit of this video, with watercolor, graphite will show through because the watercolors are transparent. So unless you're intentionally wanting to show graphite lines, you would want to make this as minimal as possible for your guidelines. To me, I don't worry so much on these sketches and stuff, because this is the first time doing it too. So it's going to probably take you a few attempts to get it the way that you want. And that's normal. So practice makes perfect. Okay. So I've got that nice and faint the way that I want it. And then this is where we're going to start using our masking fluid to start blocking out things. So I'm going to go ahead and just completely block out the eyes and a little bit around it. You can see right here how there's that tiny bit of white showing. And that is just to create that look of an eyeball and eyelids. And it creates that little bit of white just to make it look more natural. And then we're also going to create some fringe and other little details with our marks. So if you don't have masking fluid, you can use a white wax crayon to get the same effect. And I'm just going to check on the cat really quick because he's going crazy. So 1 second. Sorry about that. Just needed a minute to get that under control. So the next step we're going to do again is to mask out our white areas of our painting that we want to keep white, especially since you usually don't use white with watercolor. Now you can always cheat with that. You can use white gouache or acrylic paint that's been watered down to create these highlights as well, but I'm just going to try and show you this process the way you would traditionally do it. So in this case, what I'm going to do is use this masking fluid that has this nice needle point to it. You can also use masking fluid without the needle point on it. I got one of these color shapers that is a silicone brush. So if you're worried about using a brush that gets damaged by the latex in masking fluid, you can just get something like this that has a nice point to it. Or you can just use an old brush that you don't care about. So sometimes you can find things around the house as well that can work to create these thin lines. So if you have an old needle or something, you can pour out some masking fluid into a cup and use your needle to draw that down, or something else similar to it. So you can be pretty creative with mark making. Now this one's kind of tricky because sometimes it wants to, it just exploded. It wants to pour out too much liquid, even though it has this nice point to it. So I tend to just, hi Bogart. I tend to just make sure that there's nothing clogging it on a paper towel. Just make sure that works well. And then I will also hold it at an angle where only just a little bit of it is going to be coming out. Hi. Every time, I swear I record every time this cat is in this. So what I'm going to do is just hold it at an angle, and then we're going to create some of this fringe for the Highland cow. And if something doesn't look right, or if you get like a glob of paint or something, buddy, you can always wait for it to dry and then you can peel it right up. So again, I'm holding it at the side. Seriously? Okay. And I'm just going to put a few marks on here really quick so you can see what I mean about the fringe. I like to have them going in different directions, create some little wispies of hair. Have some coming around the ears. Again, we're just blocking anywhere where we want to keep that white. So it doesn't look like much now, but it gives you wiggle room for when you are putting in your darker colors, because then you don't have to worry all about highlights and you can just paint. And there's something I think that's always really freeing about that, especially when you're working on something like an animal that takes a little bit more detail work. Now, when you get down here to where this little intersecting line is, we're going to go in an opposite direction. We're going to have things radiating from that point, just to create that little part that happens down the face like that. Now you could do the same thing with your wax crayons and other things around the house that will create that same illusion. I also like to have some that just look like little tufts of hair on the ends of the ears, like that. It's always really fun. You can make ones that are a little bit more curly than others. And you can add as many of these as you'd like, because the nice thing is that after you're done painting them in, if you feel like there's too much white that's showing from all these lines, or they just look kind of messy, you can paint into them and it creates a really beautiful glaze of color, which is what I did on this original one. So I had several lines that are now covered over just to create this effect. Bogey, please do not turn off my recording. Oh, I'm scared of this cat. Okay. It's too much. I don't know how people have human children. You have to have the patience of a saint. I do not. Okay. Too much information. You can also create some little whiskers coming off of the muzzle, since they tend to have little whiskers. Again, anywhere where you want to have just some white highlights. Now I'm also going to add in a little bit for the eyes. I'm just going to completely cover that up along with a little bit of white around them. And that's going to preserve the look of the eyelid and any other lines that you need to have for it. So you can always go a little bit further out. They're going to look kind of more like alien eyes right now, but that's okay. And some people even do that for the eyelashes as well, if you want to see what that looks like, where you're just pulling that line down a little bit more. Like that. Okay. Let me just have a few more little whiskers here or there down here. I like a lot of the texture on the nose of the Highland cow. You can add a little highlight towards the top if you want, and around the nostrils if you want to add just a little bit more highlight. Okay, so it's going to look kind of weird. Last thing I might do is just have a few more little wispies that are going out along the horns, just so it connects the head to those, because they sometimes can feel really disjointed from the rest of the Highland cow. But just have fun with it. There's really nothing you can do wrong with this part. Okay, so this is just going to take a few minutes for it to dry. And once it's completely dry, it's easy to tell because the colors usually will change. You can see if it's just the white latex, it's going to have more of like a yellow tint to it. In this case, the blue is just going to look a little bit darker, and you'll feel the difference. It just feels like rubber across the surface of your paper, and that's when you know that it's nice and dry. So there's no real way to speed this process up. Something like a hair dryer is probably going to move it around on you or change the consistency of it. So I suggest, just taking a quick break, getting a cup of coffee or tea, grabbing a snack or something. And then by the time you're done with that, it should be completely ready. So I will be right back after this dries. Okay, so it looks like everything is now dry to the touch. Even the eye is on here now. So we can go ahead and get started with our painting finally. I know you're probably dying to do that. So what I like to do is to start with the horns. And that way we can get that taken care of. And then we'll go in with the rest of the features of the cow. So with the horns, we're going to do a mixture of wet on dry and wet on wet techniques. And that's just meaning that we either add water to the paper first before we start painting, or we just paint directly onto it. So in this case, we're going to be adding in those colors with the wet and wet technique right through here. So you can overlap anywhere where those hairs are on the top of the head here. That's no problem at all. You just want to be a little bit more gentle with your brush so you don't accidentally pull up any of that liquid material. So with this one, I'm just going to use where did it just go? The number 6, so I can fill in a decent amount of color and drop that in on these both sides. And we're going to quickly mix our purple together, or our violet color. And that way we can use that to create some of these muted browns and other colors that we're going to want. So to do that, I'm just going to take a little bit of my alizarin crimson. Just going to pick it up and just move it to one of these other little wells right here. And a little bit of my ultramarine blue. See, it creates a really beautiful violet color. You can always do just a quick swatch of it just to make sure it's the color that you want. And if you're using the pan, it's mixing this color right here with your ultramarine blue. So these two on your palette. And so you're also going to take just a little dollop of that color and a tiny bit of your cadmium yellow and mix those two together. And that's going to create that nice neutral color that we're looking for. So your cadmium yellow is this color right here. Mix a little bit more of those purples and yellow just so I can fill in the horns pretty easily. Now, what I did on the other one too is you can pop in just a little bit of that violet color, a little bit of alizarin or red color as you go. But for right now, we just want to get that first bit going. So I'm going to start with a clean, wet brush. And I am just going to go right into anywhere where the horn is at with that shape. And you don't have to worry about it being exactly perfect. We just want to make sure that we have the paper slightly damp so it can blend together on the paper easily. And the watercolor is only really going to go where there's water on the paper. So you have a decent amount of control over the borders of it. So you can see right here how it's got a nice glossy look to it. And we're going to start by dropping some of that neutral color that we created by mixing our violets with a little bit of our yellow. So I'm just going to start with that bottom half of the horns, and you can leave areas where they're white. Like that, you can see it's already creating a nice little blended effect. Take a little bit more of my yellow if I want to have some pops of yellow. So I just added a little bit more yellow to that mixture we had just to create some nice browns. And I'm just dropping that color anywhere where I want there to be little marks on our Highland cow. So this one is quite brown and red, so I'm just making this new one slightly different. Just so there's a little bit more contrast between the horn and the rest of the shapes. If you want, you can take a little bit of your alizarin crimson and mix it with that little batch of color that we had. And you can drop some of that through parts of these shapes. Take some violet straight out of that original color we mixed. And really any colors you want to add to it. They're just going to bleed into each other and create a really nice neutral gray with pops of color. Now the bottom of the horns are usually a little bit darker, so I want to mix some of my ultramarine blue with a little bit of my burnt umber. So in my palette, it would be these two colors here. And that's going to create that gray color that's a little bit darker than this one right here. I'm just going to mix this in the center. This is also going to be used to create shadows and other things. That one's nice and dark. Okay. Add a little bit more blue to it. Just because I want a little bit more of that color. There we go. So there's one where it's a little bit more on the brown side, and then this one is more on like a blue-gray side. You can go even lighter with that if you want to just add a little bit more water to your brush. But I want to keep this a little bit dark so it will have that effect. That's really dark, but that's going to bleed nicely. So I'm just keeping that on the bottom edge and just on the very ends of the horns. I'm going to do that on both sides. It's just going to create this illusion of shape. So it looks like they're round and shadows. And then you can even have some just a little bit, if you want to just add a dot here or there on the top. But that creates a really beautiful effect. Now, if something looks too dark or if you put too much water down, it's probably bleeding everywhere and you're losing some of your colors. So you can just take a dry, clean brush and just pick up any of those colors that are overwhelming your other ones. Or if there's too much water that's sitting on the top of your paper, that can sometimes be a problem. So you can just scoop that up and then wipe off that excess color on your paper towel. I lost a little bit of my yellow color, so I'm just going to put some of that back in there. And some of them have a lot of spots to the horns and things, so you can really have fun with those colors. Put a little bit more alizarin too. And this is known as like a variegated wash, where you're having colors mixed together as damp colors on your paper. So you really just allow the paints to mix together to create a new color. Just going to pull this in a little bit more because it's starting to feel disconnected from the rest of the head. So just make sure it's going all the way in to there. I'm going to add a little bit of a darker color down here again. And that looks good. It's going to dry really nice. So your watercolors are always going to dry a little bit lighter than what you're seeing right now too. But again, if you ever feel like something's too dark, you can just pick that up with your brush and wipe off any of that excess color. But I think that'll look great. Okay, now for the fun part. So I think this is all fun. So now what we're going to do is just find any of those other darker shadows that we're looking for. So there's some towards the center and along the sides of the head right here, some underneath the mouth and on the sides of the face. So we're going to do this, and it's going to be more of a light wash. So with the same blue gray color that we created by mixing our ultramarine blue with our burnt umber. So again, these two colors right here, you're going to mix them together, and you're just going to add a little bit more water to them. So it's nice and light. And we're just going to put that into a few areas where we know we have some darker shadows. And you can be nice and loose with this because we are going to be layering. Go around the face, part of the ears. We're going to avoid this center a little bit because we want to keep that pretty light. And I'm also just being really sporadic with the colors. So I'm leaving areas where they're a little bit lighter than others. So we can create this really nice effect of light and shadow and different textures of the hair. And then we're going to create that light effect on the nose. So you can just do a whole filling in of the muzzle. And then underneath the muzzle, we're going to add a little bit of a darker shadow. So this is going to look really light, just like a nice wash. But it's going to give us the starting point that we're looking for. So while this is still damp, we can start mixing in some of our other colors. So you can start with some of your yellow right here. You can add a tiny bit of your violet to it if you want to create this mustard color. If you don't want to mix that, you can go right in with your yellow ochre, which is this color right here on the palette, and you'll get a similar look. We're keeping this really watery. You can see that I have barely any pigment on my brush. And I'm just going to start dropping that in anywhere that I want that color. And I'm using all the colors pretty sparingly. That way they're not overwhelming each other. It's really just light washes that we're doing. Bring some of that down here towards the bottom. So it's going to look messy for a little while, but it's all going to come together. Hello. Got a little bit more yellow around the ears. And then just a little bit around the nose. Again, we're not thinking too hard about it. We're just adding that color where we need it. Okay. Your other gray color is already pretty much dry at this point too. You can see the horns are already looking different. Now from here, just to get some more color going in here, I'm going to go in with our raw umber, or I'm sorry, raw sienna. I can't remember the name of this. So either burnt sienna or raw sienna is going to create this nice red color that we're looking for. You can see it's a really transparent color that we mixed earlier. Just going to dip into that. I'm going to add this color in. It's going to blend a little bit with that yellow that we put down, which is perfectly fine. Put a little bit more along the ears. Have a little bit going into the horns. Again, it's looking really messy, but that's what we're going for. And I'm following the patterns that we put down for the hair too. So you can see here when I'm going around this part of the face, I'm pushing that color out a little bit. Add some down here for the rest of the body. You can always dilute it with a little bit of water on your brush. And go around the muzzle. And I'm just tapping it in any place that I want a little bit more of this color. Now we're getting somewhere. So I'm kind of avoiding the muzzle a little bit at this point because I don't want it to look as dark as everything else. It needs to be a little bit lighter. And I think I want to add just a little bit more yellow in areas. So you can always go in with your yellow ochre if you want. Want a really bright pop of yellow. Or I'm just going to go in with this yellow right here mixed with a little bit of my violet color. So we're looking for a mustard color. This just brightens up your Highland cow a little bit more. And then lastly, I want to go in with this darker brown, just in a few other little spots. And then I'm going to let that sit and dry before we add in other details. So this part went really fast, which is great. The last thing I want to make sure that I do though is add in this darker area of that dark brown around the muzzle and under the chin. So you can either go in directly with your burnt umber, which is this color right here, or you can mix a version of that by putting together your violet color with your yellow. It's going to make it a little bit more balanced if you do it that way, but sometimes you need a slightly darker color. You can see right here, it's a pretty color for the mix, but it's not as dark as we might need. So I'm just going to instead mix some of my burnt umber and ultramarine. Yeah. So you can add this lighter color anywhere where you want a little pop throughout the face, and then this darker color with your ultramarine and burnt umber. Again, these two right here. And we'll get this dark color. I'm just going to go right under the muzzle. And we're just keeping it nice and light. Really choppy brush strokes. And you can just take a second to make sure that you cover where that chin is right here, so you can see that on the screen, since that's going to be our darkest area. I'm also going to just drop some of this darker color in towards the center of the ears and along part of the sides of the face. On the sides of the head as well, right here. And then towards the center. So you can really see it's starting to take shape now. So again, focus mainly right down here with that burnt umber, a little bit in this area where the ears are connecting to the head, because there's usually a shadow right there. And then just a little bit right here towards the center, just because that's where we're going to create that little illusion of the hair separating and going down the side of the face. I'm going to make this look a little bit more dramatic on screen so you can see it better. So again, I'm just mixing that ultramarine with my burnt umber to get this same color right here. And if you go a little bit darker, just use smaller brush strokes in those same areas. I just want to make sure you know where things are, because I'm working kind of fast, but this is a process where you have to be kind of quick with it to get those colors to blend. But it's also really freeing because, you know, there's really no way you can go wrong with this part. You just add those colors in and then let it dry, and it tends to dry a little bit lighter anyway. So it gives you a lot of room to just paint without thinking too hard. I think you can see that a little bit better on screen now. And right under the chin. Along the sides of the face, so that thins it out a little bit more so it doesn't look like a big egg or oval. And we're just pushing them out from that center. So as long as you're following those little guidelines that we put in for our masking fluid, this makes this quite easy to see where you need to go. And that's looking really good. I feel like this muzzle is a little too light now, so I'm just going to dilute that same color with just a little bit of water so you get this nice soft gray. And I'm just going to fill that in. And always scoop up anything that looks too dark. We're going to let that dry before we add in the details of the nostrils. Otherwise, it's just going to bloom out and be a mess. So we're going to let that sit. But while this other part is drying, you can always go in with your burnt sienna color, this one right here. Or on your palette, it's this one right here. You can just always add little pops of this color. That's one thing I think that got a little bit lost. feel like the second drafts of these always look better than the original too, because I know the process. So some of this is probably going to look a little bit more colorful. And I actually like where the blue masking tape is as a complementary color. You can see how that works out when there's that little pop of blue, it makes these oranges pop more. So later on, if you wanted to add a little bit of that blue color in with your watercolors, just very sparingly, it does help to draw in the overall colors of your piece. And that's just because they're complementary colors. So anything that's on the opposite side of a color wheel is known as a complementary color. And it's one of the most important things you can learn from color theory. It's also the most direct. So we're not getting too detailed with color theory. It's just a good rule of thumb if you want to think about ways to make your art stand off the page. There are many, many other processes that do similar things. I just think it's great for beginners. Make this down here a little bit more bold with our reds and oranges. I just love this color. Now, if you want, while this is other drying as well, what I did was I just added some few little flicks of color with my orange right here, using a small brush. So your number 2 or something similar with your round will work really well for that. And I'm just going right into that same color we were just using and just flicking that color out just in a few spots. With watercolor, it's always about just showing you a little bit of information and then your brain is filling in the rest of it. So don't feel like you have to add every single hair to your Highland cow. That'll just drive you nuts. But it also just gives your brain time to imagine, the rest of the design. So I like to have some little swoops here or there around the top of the head, kind of coming up. Some can also be going further into the horns and down the face. Also just like to add a little pop of this color now that the muzzle is dried a little bit, so you can connect it with the rest of the face. So you can see here how I just glazed that on. So that's me just doing a really light layer on something that's already dried down. This looks like silly string or something right here. That's funny. Okay. And then we're just going to let this sit and dry for a minute, because after that, I'm going to show you how to add in your last little details. But we just did the majority of the work in just a few minutes. So it really is a quick paced design. And that way, once you get into the swing of things, you can sketch out a few of these at a time, and then you can just jump in with your painting once you're ready. And then you can have several of these done within a few hours. So that's the beauty of watercolors. It can be really a test of your patience while you wait for things to dry, but then there's also the chance to work quickly on several projects at once. So I just always find it really fun. Okay, I will be right back. We're going to remove our masking fluid after everything dries. I'll show you how to do that, and we'll finish the rest of our design. Okay, so once everything has dried down, what you can do is start pulling up your masking fluid. So you just want to make sure it's completely dry before you do this next step, else you may tear your paper. Now, sometimes you can just use your fingers if you're rubbing gently, or you can use a kneaded eraser. So these are usually gray, but these are just ones where they're self-cleaning. These work great because they don't damage the paper. You also can use, if you have like a rubber cement pickup, or this is like a Frisk pickup, it's the same material, it's just like a big rubber square. This also works really well at pulling up any sort of masking fluid on your design. So I'm probably just going to use my fingers because most likely you don't have these tools at home and I don't want to cheat. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to rub that away. Okay. Or if you have a clean eraser, you can use the end of your eraser. That one doesn't want to come up. Here we go. And just take your time with this part. You definitely don't want to damage your paper after all that work you just did. I usually, if you do have the tools, you don't have to worry about the oil from your fingers getting into your art. But I don't plan on selling this one, so this is just good for practice. You can see how that white is already starting to come up. And sometimes it's too much white, so we'll add in some other colors as glazes on top. But right now, I just want to see what we have. I'm just going to speed up the process on camera, or else we're going to be here all day. We're picking up all those colors. Okay. So it's still incomplete, but we have some nice hairs that are in there. I added a lot more on this one than my original one. You can also see some areas where it's a little odd looking, where there's like a big white gap in spots. So this is perfect for adding glazes. And again, our glazes are just these nice transparent colors that we're going to layer on top of other ones. And that layering effect is going to slightly change the colors. Same as like if you were putting like two stained glass pieces of different colors on top of each other, they would probably create a different looking color. So what I'm going to do is going to go back to my number 4 round. And the first thing we're going to do is just touch up any areas that we want to just tone down with our whites. So you can see here how I did some of that glazing on top, where there's just little areas where there's bits of yellow, bits of our sepia color. I keep calling it different things. Our burnt sienna color, which is very similar color to it. Yellows, yellow ochres, anywhere where you want to just tone down some of those textures so they're not so distracting. And then we'll just leave a few here or there that are nice and light. So just pick up anything off the center area of your palette. I'm going to start with my yellow. And we're just going to do a nice thin layer with lots of water on it, just to push that back. You can see that's already making a huge difference on this side. If I bring in some of my burnt sienna color just in a few spots, that also helps. And you can go slow with this part so then you don't feel like you're covering up too much. The nice thing is it will be lighter still than everything else. So it creates this beautiful illusion of hairs. Add some burnt umber in places so you can follow where things already are on your design. That's starting to look really good. Add some burnt umber or a darker color anywhere you want. And we're avoiding the eye area right now. I think I want to go in with some nice bright yellow in a few spots. Yeah, that looks good. So you can leave some of them white. We just want to make sure that everything looks cohesive. You can also add any extra little tufts around the ears if you'd like. If you feel like they're a little bit light, like down here, I might just add a little bit more red or orangey color. I'm mixing my colors up today. You can also have some with your smaller brush if you want, where you're just tapering down a little bit of these lines. So this helps if you're using the number 2. And I just pulled some of these down as longer strands, just in a few spots with my yellow and my burnt sienna color. So the small brush is helpful, and you're just using the very end of it to create some nice little fringe, especially on the ears, where there's usually a lot of fringe hanging. And then if you want, you can go in with some of your burnt umber color or the color that we used for the darker areas. And if you feel like you lost some of your dark that you need for shadows, you can just go in between some of these lines that we had before. Like right here, I feel like this area is kind of off. So if I go in with this color that we had mixed, I'm going to use my small brush to do this, and we're just adding a few flecks of color here or there, just to give it some dimension so we know where the side of the face is. And you can see that more on this one. I think once we put the eye in, it's really going to come together. So if you need to go ahead and mix more of your burnt umber and your ultramarine blue, these 2 colors. We're just going to add our darkest darks here. So we're getting close to the eye, so try and avoid that. And most of this is good on this side. I feel like I just want a little bit more, just in a few little areas, to get the darkest shadows of the ears, and then maybe under the chin and just a few spots. So when you're doing layers of hair or fur or anything like that, you do have to build it up. And sometimes you just have to go in between the lines that we put in, just to create any sort of texture that looks like shadows and other little parts of the hair. But this is really close. So with this small brush, you can also use that same color. We're going to trace around the top of the muzzle right here. We're going to trace around the nostrils. Okay, and that's going to look kind of funny for a minute because we need to blend that into the rest of the design. So I'm going to do this really dark just to show you. So that looks like a weird outline now that we have all these organic looking lines. So I want you to wash your brush. You're going to tap off that excess water on your paper towel. And then I want you to just trace right over that same line to just blur it out a little bit. You may need to dip your brush 1 or 2 more times just to make sure that you get a flow of water. Just go right over that and that will diffuse that line, but it's still going to create that effect that we're looking for with it. Same thing with the nostrils here. So I'm just going to make them a little bit darker right towards the centers. So they look like 2 little crescent moons on the sides. We're also going to trace right under the lip right here so we can see where the bottom of the muzzle is. Dip your brush in your water, tap off the excess, and then we're going to just diffuse that line again. And then we're going to diffuse the outer part of our little crescent moon shapes right here. So that little bit of water is going to create that flow that we need, just so it doesn't look like a heavy line. And that's what I love about watercolors. You can always make little changes here or there that will bring everything together. Make that a little bit darker in a few spots. I feel like that diffused a little too much. The shape of this muzzle is a little bit different from the original one. You can see right here. It's a little bit smaller. That's okay. I can always pull that up a little bit if I wanted to. And then with that same color, we're also, let me just blur that a little bit. Sorry, it's bothering me. There we go. I'm picky. Okay. That same color, we're also going to just fill in this inside shape of the eyes right here. So you'll notice there's a little bit of white left around the eye, which is fine. We want to leave that there so it gives that illusion of an eyelid. You can see right here where we left a little bit of a white for the glare coming off the eyeball, and then a little bit of white left around those edges. So you're only going to be filling in this middle section right here. And the smallest brush is really good for that. So just take your time at this part. This is always really tricky, especially if you're working small like I am right now. Leave that white for the eye. And then if you want it to look like it has little eyelashes, you can extend this line right here that we had. Just extend that down with a few little flicks of your dark color. And get it to where you like the shape of the eye. So I feel like we need a little bit of shadow right around here, just in a few spots. So with that same color, I'm just going to use my small brush. And I'm just going to go in between a few of these little hairs. I may have just made this eye a little bit too wide too on mine. This one looks a little bit bigger than my original one right here. Oh, maybe not so bad. I think its face is just a little bit smaller. I'm gonna try and fix that. This is more like a baby cow face. I think I need to make them a little bit longer. So there's always ways to tweak that with our shadows. I thought I had that pretty good, but maybe while I was filling it in, I just did a little too much of something. So to do that, I'm just going to bring some of these darker lines down a tiny bit. Because this is more like a square face. We just need to make them a little bit longer. In between your little whiskers that you had, this will also clean up any areas if you have like really wide looking ones that might be just from when you added in the masking fluid, which those little lines are always hard to get the first time around. I know when I did my original one, I did the whiskers on the face a few times. And a little bit more of this darker color right here on the bottom part of the lip. We're just going to sweep that over that as a glaze. And I think I know what it is. It's this nostril right here inside of the muzzle. I'm going to make it just a little bit thinner right here. And that just made that look way better. So yeah, you just got to tweak it a little bit as you go. And at this point, it's just getting it exactly where you want your Highland cow to be. So I'm just using my burnt umber and ultramarine blue mix just to find any darker areas. And I may just make the eyes a little bit darker too in just a few spots now that they're dry, just to help them stand out a little bit more. And you don't have to do the whole eye. You can just put that in just a few little spots just to create that illusion of more shape where there's shadow, where the light is hitting it at different parts. You know, also add some glazes along the nose too, since that's looking a little bit incomplete. You can see where I just added a little bit of yellow, a little bit of that burnt sienna color in just a few areas, just so it doesn't look so flat. So I'm just going to go in with a tiny bit of my yellow right here. Just add some along the top of the nose. So it feels like it's closer to the original. It'll never be exactly like the original just because it's watercolor. I can usually get it pretty close though. And then I may just have to make part of this nostril just a little bit darker with that color we were just using for our shadows. Just in a few little spots, I can just drop that in. This nostril got kind of big, but I could probably tweak that. That looks better. But yeah, you can keep messing with that as long as you'd like. That's basically the gist of the class. So if you have any questions or anything, just let me know. The last thing I would suggest doing if you run into any issues is you can always use some white gouache or a paint pen or watered down acrylic paint if for some reason you lost some of your little highlights of the hairs and things. You also have Chinese white in here, which is a transparent white. So just to show you what that would look like if you use that for your hairs, it's going to look more like a gray tone. And traditionally in watercolor, you don't use white. That's where the masking fluid comes from. But, you know, It's in there. You can use it if you'd like. I'm not that stingy with it. And you can always add some other little hairs and details to it if you want to add in any gray tones or anything. I like to do that for bird feathers just because they tend to have a gray tone anyway. But it won't be like a white. It won't be anything like the white of the paper. That's why artists try so hard to include that in their design. And then lastly, you would usually just initial in the bottom corner of your design with a graphite pencil. Sometimes people sign the backs of them. So just let me know if you run into any issues or have any questions, and I would love to see how your design turned out. Okay, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.